Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants will have an open line for the duration of today's conference. Please utilize your mute button when you are not speaking to minimize the background noise. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, please disconnect at this time. And I'd like to turn the meeting over to Ms. Michelle Bouchard. Thank you, and you may begin.
Thank you. Welcome to today's webinar on the Now is the Time State Educational Agency Grant Program. I'd like you to please note that we will have a second webinar on June 10th. My name is Michelle Bouchard, and I work for SAMHSA. Also with me today are Melody Watson, who also works with me at SAMHSA, as well as Brian Williams, who is with the Office of Safe and Healthy Students out of the Department of Education. Today's webinars will provide you with a brief overview of the two Now is the Time State Educational Agency Grant Programs. You will have an opportunity to ask any questions at two different points during the webinar. The two grant programs we will be talking about today are part of President Obama's Now is the Time plan that was issued in early 2013 following the Newtown school shooting. As President Obama said after the Sandy Hook tragedy, we won't be able to stop every violent act, but if there is one thing we can do to prevent any of these events, we have a deep obligation, all of us, to try. Two components of the Now is the Time plan were to make schools safer and to increase access to mental health services. So the two grant programs we're going to be talking about today address both of these particular components. The next two slides will summarize the key aspects of both of these two programs. The Department of Health and Human Services grant program is called Now is the Time Project Aware for State Educational Agencies. The Ed Grant program for Now is the Time is called the School Climate Transformation Grants for State Educational Agencies. Please note that the deadline for submitting applications is June 16th for the SAMHSA program and June 23rd for the Ed program, and that the State Education Agency must submit applications for both of these programs. The project period for both of these programs is up to 5 years, and there's not any cost-sharing requirement. The state education agencies can request up to $1.95 million per year for Project Aware, and for the school climate transformation grants, the range of funding is between $250,000 to $750,000 per year, with an average award amount of $400,000. SAMHSA expects to make up to 20 awards for Project Aware and Ed up to 18 for the school climate transformation. Melody Watson here from SAMHSA will now provide an overview of SAMHSA's Project Aware for the State Educational Agency Grant Program.
Thank you, Michelle. So today's agenda, we're going to go over Project Aware. We'll also talk about Project Aware requirements and activities, and then we'll spend some time taking your questions and providing you with answers on the RFA. So what is Project Aware? Its purpose is to build and expand the capacity of state educational agencies to increase awareness of mental health issues among school-age youth. This program will support state educational agencies in the development of a comprehensive, coordinated, and integrated program for advancing wellness and resilience in educational settings. And AWARE stands for Advancing Wellness and Resilience in Education. Who is eligible? State educational agencies, also known as SEAs, as defined by Section 9101, Section 41 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And please note, applicants of this grant are also required to apply for the Department of Education's School Climate Transformation Grant for State Educational Agency Grant. Thank you. Next slide. So, Project Aware has two components. The first component focuses on addressing the mental health needs of children, youth, families and their caregivers, and communities. It builds off the strategies of the Safe Schools Healthy Students Initiative. It provides communities with increased access to school and community-based mental health services, improves coordination of state and local policies and resources, as well as identify strategies to access existing funding mechanisms to further support mental health services for school-age youth. Next slide. Thank you. The second component is to implement mental health first aid and or youth mental health first aid state and local training programs. Under this component, there will be training of school personnel and other adults who interact with school-age youth in mental health first aid or youth mental health first aid. Youth mental health first aid is designed to help adolescents aged 12 to 18, and mental health first aid is designed to help individuals 18 and older. The mental health first aid course is available in both English and Spanish. Training and certification on youth mental health first aid and mental health first aid is administered by the National Council for Behavioral Health, the Maryland Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and the Missouri Department of Mental Health. For more information on mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid, you can see Appendix H in the RFA. Next slide. Thank you. So, Project Aware requirements for SEAs. First, you will need to develop collaborative partnerships. Each SEA will need to select 3 local educational agencies. They'll need to describe how Project Aware will address the needs of high-needs LEAs and develop coordination and integration plans of service and strategies. SEAs are also required to create a state management team. State management teams will coordinate and support the development and implementation of the Now is the Time Aware SEA Coordination and Integration Plan. They should also involve youth and family representatives, representatives from state mental behavioral health agencies, representatives from the state criminal and juvenile justice agencies, as well as the 3 LEAs. You'll also be required to conduct a needs assessment and environmental scan. And this will include a descriptive demographic information of the LEAs, risk and protective factors. It will describe the needs and gaps of the LEAs in their communities. It will describe the availability of existing school and community-based mental health services, as well as identify the available resource systems and programs within the state and the LEAs that serve school-age youth and their families in the environmental scan. Next slide. Thank you. SEAs are also required to develop a mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid training plan. In this plan, you will have your partnerships established with the LEAs. You'll describe which course will be used based on the developmental appropriateness of your target population. You will also identify a program coordinator, and this person is responsible for overseeing the project and should also be trained in mental health first aid and or youth mental health first aid. You'll indicate the total number of individuals to be trained as instructors. You'll indicate the total number of individuals in each LEA community trained by the mental health first aid or youth mental health first aid instructors. You'll identify additional youth serving adults to be trained from each LEA, describe the profession and positions of the youth serving adults to be trained. You'll also be responsible for tracking first aider certification for each LEA and community. And you'll indicate existing mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid training and describe how this project will enhance or support existing training activities. Next slide. Thank you. Another requirement is to complete letters of commitment. You'll need to have one from each of your required partners. You'll need to have one from youth and family representatives or organizations on the state management team. Your letters of commitment should be attachment 1 in your application, and if you review page 30 of the RFA, you'll get additional details on the letters of commitment. It should be signed by the authorized representative from each partner agency and will include information on organization capacity, a statement of willingness and past experience and collaborative efforts, and a description of what the partner offers to support the project. And finally, it will identify representatives to serve on the state management team. Thank you. Now we'll turn to just what some of the program activities are for Project Aware. You are going to develop and implement a coordination and integration plan. You'll do this in partnership with your local education agencies and public mental health agencies. You'll create a referral process for school and community-based mental health services. support LEAs in leveraging state and local funding to support mental health services. It'll provide a timeline for the project period indicating key activities, milestones, and staff. And this is included in the project narrative. So that timeline should not be in a part of an attachment, but within your project narrative. We'll also collaborate with education and local juvenile justice and law enforcement agencies, ensure communication and information sharing across service systems, develop or improve state policies on access to mental health services, and develop infrastructure to sustain mental health promotion, illness prevention, and treatment services beyond the grant. All right. Thank you. In a continuation of the activities, you will identify the link with Now is the Time Aware and existing cross-system activities. Describe how Now is the Time Aware activities will be integrated and coordinated with the ED School Climate Transformation Grant activities. You also collect LEA-level disaggregated data on school climate and discipline and mental health services, and engage youth and families throughout the project. The second activity is to implement the mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid training programs. So this will include coordination with the 3 LEA communities. You'll also need to provide mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid training to other LEAs and communities in your state. Provide trainings with resources and information on existing mental health services and referral systems and supports. You'll have to sustain mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid beyond the grant, and you should be training at least 6 individuals at the state as instructors in year 1 of the project. You will also train at least 3 instructors and up to 125 first aiders in each LEA in each year of the project. Now, at the local education level, these are the following activities that have to be implemented. You'll need to identify an LEA manager. The LEAs will have to assist the SEA in mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid training. Support the SEA in the development and implementation of the Now is the Time Aware Coordination and Integration Plan. Identify community-based mental health resources for school-age youth and their families. Conduct community outreach to train diverse populations in mental health first aid and or youth mental health first aid. Implement mental health services referral system for school-age youth. Collect data for local quality improvement and for the SEA evaluation, and participate with the SEA in the national multi-site evaluation. Next slide. Now I just want to turn to the budget and point out a few highlights here. As a part of your application, a budget and a narrative justification of proposed expenses is required. And you also see there's a breakdown in the way in which grant funds should be allocated. So 87% of the funds will be specific for component 1. And of that 87%, 75% should support LEA activities, 15% will support SEA activities, and not more than 10% of the total grant award will be used for evaluation activities. For component 2, 13% of the award should be used to do mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid training activities. And the state educational agency may actually keep up to 100% of that 13% for those activities. You'll also be required to budget for a representative team to attend at least one joint grantee meeting in Washington, D.C. for up to 3 days. And these meetings will be held in year 1, 3, and 5 of the project. And we have a very good illustration of a budget and narrative justification included in Appendix E of the RFA. Thank you. So if you have further questions, you can email them. The address is SEA_AWARE re@samhsa.hhs.gov. And we'll also open up the lines now for any questions you might have.
Are there any questions? There are two things that I want to point. This is Michelle again. That I want to point out. First, there has been a modification to the RFA that was made last week, and it's to section 2.2.1, and it omitted the two words, and those words were high need, and they were attached to LEAs. So the language now reads that the SEA is required to select 3 local education agencies and then must describe in their application how they plan to address the needs of high-need LEAs. So the requirement and the definition of high-need LEA has been changed. The other error actually in the RFA is in the budget, the sample budget that Melody was referring to in an appendix. I think it's Appendix E. And it says that 13%, up to 13% of the total grant award, and it gives you a dollar amount, and that's incorrect. I believe it's within the RFA is about $236,000, and the actual number is around $253,000. So just know the percentages are correct, but the numbers are not.
I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Can you say who you are and where you're calling from?
Yes, I sure will. This is Jenny O'Connell calling from the great state of Georgia, Department of Education.
Great.
Just a point of clarification. We identify 3 LEAs, but you don't refer to those as 3 high needs LEAs. And then you say we need to describe how we'll support our high needs LEAs. Are we referencing the same 3 LEAs that we're describing, or are we describing additional LEAs that we'd be supporting?
No, you'd be describing the 3 LEAs that you'd be supporting through the SEA Project Aware.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to make sure we weren't to include something additional.
No, no.
Thanks.
Other questions? There will be an opportunity at the end to ask additional questions, so I'll give it another 10 seconds, and if not, then we'll continue with the presentation.
May I ask one more question? This is Jenny O'Connell from Georgia. Will we be able to download this PowerPoint by any chance?
I know the webinar is being recorded,
okay.
And I'm looking at someone, and she's nodding her head, so I think the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you, because we have several of our LEAs were not able to participate today that we're working with, so it'd be nice. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and just remember, Ginny, we're also going to be doing this webinar again on June 10th. I know that's getting pretty close to the due date, but we will be doing that again, and for Project Aware only, not for the Ed School Climate Transformation. Okay. We also have 2 more conference calls scheduled. In a minute, I'll look up those dates, but the conference calls are only 45-minute calls, and we do a real brief overview of Project Aware, and then we open up to questions. So there'll be 2 other opportunities. There'll be 1 more webinar, and there'll be 2 conference calls. The 2 conference calls, one is on May 27th from 2 to 2:45. The other one is on June 3rd from 2 to 2:45, and then again, the second webinar will be June 10th. The information for the webinars and the conference calls, if you go to the grants page on EMC.gov and you scroll down till you get to Now is the Time Project Aware for State Educational Agencies, there will be a hyperlink, and if you click on that, it will give you all the information about the pre-application technical assistance calls and webinars. Any other questions? Okay, if not, let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to pass this on to Brian Williams, who is with the U.S. Department of Education.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks for inviting me to participate in the webinar today. As Michelle just mentioned, I am Brian Williams, and I work for the Office of Safe and Healthy Students in the U.S. Department of Education. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the School Climate Transformation Grant Program for state educational agencies. As you may or may not know, this program was announced on May 7th, and I'm going to go over a few items in terms of requirements and purpose, and essentially what we're looking for in terms of proposals under this program. Next slide, please. As Michelle mentioned earlier, this program was established as a part of Now is the Time. Our philosophy and what we believe is that we need to make our schools safer, not only by enhancing physical security and responding to emergencies, but we also need to create safer and more nurturing school climates to help prevent school violence. Under this initiative, the Now is the Time Interagency Initiative, assistance is available across a continuum of funding sources for addressing school safety and climate. So these programs are connected, meaning their goals are complementary. And by implementing them in tandem, we're hoping that schools are able to move forward and toward a more comprehensive and integrated approach to creating safe and supportive schools. So you could go to the next slide, please. The purpose of this grant program is to provide grants to state educational agencies, or as we typically say in the department, we refer to them as LEAs, to develop, enhance, or expand statewide systems of support for and technical assistance to local educational agencies, or LEAs, and schools implementing an evidence-based, multi-tiered behavioral framework such as positive behavioral interventions and supports, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, that guides the selection, integration, and implementation of the best evidence-based behavioral practices for improving school climate and behavioral outcomes for all students. This program actually builds on the development and testing of multi-tiered behavioral frameworks, which have been supported with funds from the Department's Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. OSERS, as we refer to it, has invested in developing and implementing behavioral intervention, supports, and strategies for actually over 30 years. I should note that when we refer to a multi-tiered behavioral framework, we will often refer to PBIS. PBIS does not mean any specific program or curriculum. Rather, we use this term generically to reference a multi-tiered behavioral framework used to improve the integration and implementation of behavioral practices, data-driven decision-making systems, professional development opportunities, training, school leadership, supportive policies, and evidence-based strategies. A key aspect of this approach is that it provides differing levels of support and interventions to students based on their needs. So an approach like PBS can help to improve behavioral and academic outcomes by improving school climate, increasing instructional time, promoting positive social skills. And I know, many of you on the line are already aware of the research that shows that when these frameworks are implemented with fidelity, schools can experience reductions in problem behavior, generally measured by office discipline referrals and suspension, decreases in bullying and peer victimization, improved organizational health and perception of school as a safe setting, increased academic performance, and there is also evidence that youth risk factors are reduced in schools where these frameworks are implemented as well. And as I'm sure you're aware, reduced risk factors are correlated with reduced drug use, among other improved behaviors. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So as you see, the absolute priority mirrors the program purpose, and that's increasing the capacity of SEAs to expand to more schools, multi-tiered behavioral frameworks, and we're hoping that that will help them guide the selection, integration, and implementation of the best evidence-based practices and strategies for improving conditions for learning. And as you see at the bottom, I should note for any LEAs that may be on the line, please note that eligible applicants under this program are state educational agencies only, not LEAs or school districts. So there is actually a separate school climate transformation program that is available specifically for LEAs, and that's, you see the CFDA number, it's 84.184G, and that was actually announced on May 7th as well. If you could go to the next slide, thanks. In addition, as you see, there is a competitive preference priority in addition to the absolute priority. Under this priority, up to 5 additional points may be added to a proposal that proposes to coordinate grant activities with other related activities with the purpose of enhancing the overall impact of the school climate transformation grant. So I added a few examples of the types of other activities that could be related to the school climate transformation grants. Obviously, Project Aware is right at the top. The Safe Schools, Healthy Students grant program, Race to the Top, available from the Department of Education, school improvement grants. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I should also point out that we aren't specifically requiring these other coordinated activities to be federal activities. They could be local school improvement activities or school reform activities. It's up to each applicant to describe a credible, high-quality plan to coordinate the school climate transformation activities with these other related activities. And I should also note that typically in the department's grant process, competitive preference priorities are not required. They are optional. So it's not mandatory for folks to apply for the competitive preference. However, I should also note out that they often prove to be the difference between getting a grant and not getting a grant if the competition is pretty competitive. Can we go to the next slide, please? So for the sake of time, I've distilled the program requirements down from what is described in the application package. Broadly speaking, each applicant must propose a plan that builds SEA capacity for supporting sustained and broad-scale implementation of a multi-tiered behavioral framework in school districts, enhances LEA capacity for implementing and sustaining a multi-tiered behavioral framework by providing training and technical assistance to school districts, and 3, coordinates efforts with appropriate federal, state, and local resources. Next slide, please. Thank you. There are 4 application requirements that should be addressed in each proposal submitted. Please note that when you review the application package, you will see that the application requirements must be addressed or your proposal will be ineligible. So the next 4 requirements that I go over, each of those things needs to be addressed in your proposal, or unfortunately it would be found ineligible. The first requirement, A, that you see on the screen is describe the current efforts by the state educational agency to support implementation of a multi-tiered behavioral framework in LEAs in schools, as well as evidence of the need to implement, scale up, and sustain such a framework. To address this requirement, the applicant should really conduct a needs assessment and present relevant and appropriate state and local data demonstrating this need. Obviously, again, the application goes into much more detail about this, but for an example, that would be, the number and types of LEAs in schools that are currently implementing an approach or strategy such as PBIS, or any other data that demonstrates that a approach like this would be something that would be needed in the school district. Next slide, please. Again, B, this is pretty self-explanatory, and I think that this requirement actually gets to pretty much the center of what we're asking applicants to respond to. Your application should explain a plan to build, improve, or enhance the SEA capacity to provide effective training, technical assistance, and support. We hope that these grants will allow SEAs to build capacity in those school districts where the need for PBIS and multi-tiered behavioral framework will be most successful. And we're hoping that, over time, as Michelle mentioned earlier, these are 5-year grants. We're hoping that this will be something that becomes basically sustainable in the SEA and LEAs, and that they will be able to sustain these efforts past the period of federal funding. Next slide, please. The third requirement looks at how the proposed project will address the needs of high-need LEAs, including high-poverty schools, low-performing schools, persistently lowest-achieving schools, and priority schools. The department expects that the school's climate transformation grants to serve all types of schools in all types of communities. However, applicants are required to consider how it will address the needs of districts where there are schools with significant issues and where the program may have significant impact on students most at risk. So, obviously the Project Aware grants get to, address the high-need LEAs as well. And for people that may not be familiar with these terms, there are definitions in the application package and in the Federal Register notice for each of those terms on the screen, and they go into much more detail in the application package and in the Federal Register notice. Next slide, please. Finally, applicants are required to describe how its efforts will be linked to other school safety, school improvement, and school reform efforts. So, we're hoping that the approach that folks take, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, and that they're able to link other initiatives and programs and other activities and efforts to this multi-tiered behavioral framework. And we're hoping that building upon this type of approach will obviously make well, number one, will make an impact in the schools where the need is greatest, and two, will again allow the SEA to build the LEA capacity, or I'm sorry, enhance the LEA capacity to continue these efforts and to sustain them on their own. And in doing so, we will provide a much safer, supportive, and healthy school environment for kids that need them. Next slide, please. All right. That, I know I went pretty quickly, but in a nutshell, that is what this program is about. I realize that this was, very brief overview. However, please feel free to contact our office if you have any additional questions after today. I promise that the email and phone number that you see on the screen actually do work and go to an actual phone. You have the program page that you see below my contact information. You can visit that page on the department's website, and you can download the application package. You can read the Federal Register notice, and I should also mention that later this month we will have a webinar specifically for the School Climate Transformation Grant applicants, and we haven't nailed down a specific date yet, but I believe it's going to be before the end. It's going to be before the end of the month, and I think it's going to be the last week of May. But if you go to that program page on your screen, there will be additional information and specific call-in and webinar information there once we get that finalized. So thank you for your attention, and now I'm going to turn it back over for questions.
Okay, so we're going to open, your line should be open. If you have any questions for Brian, please ask them. You also, if you have any additional questions for Project Aware, please feel free to ask.
I could not have been that clear if there are no questions. But apparently I was.
We'll give it another minute.
I'll let it sink in.
Yeah, if make sure you're off. If you are trying to ask a question, that you're not on mute.
Well, this is Cindy Peck, a consultant for the state of Wyoming, and
okay.
I got this announcement rather late, and I've been trying to read through it feverishly this morning, and the link to the PowerPoint didn't work for the meeting, for me. So you're going to post this PowerPoint somewhere, and then secondly, is it true that you have to apply for both together? That's why.
Yes, we will be posting the PowerPoint. Where will it be posted? Yeah, we'll post it on probably at least on the SAMHSA website. I would hope on the ED website. You did have to put your name, or you didn't get in the PowerPoint. It'll definitely be posted on the SAMHSA, the grants page of SAMHSA.gov, and we'll try to get it on grants.gov and ed.gov also. And yes, it is correct that you have to apply for both programs. So you have to apply for Project Aware for state educational agencies, as well as the school climate transfer.
Okay, and then the expected number of awards, if I may ask a follow-up question, please, is 18 for the school climate transformation, and wasn't it 20 for SAMHSA funding?
Yeah.
So what will happen to the two in between? You get one or the other?
Well, I mean, to be honest, those are really just approximations. You know, it depends on, at least for the Department of Education, we're kind of guessing 18 awards. We have no way of, you know, knowing who's going to apply, and number two, you know, what they're going to ask for in terms of funding per year. So that's honestly just kind of our best guess. But, you know, it could be more, it could be more, it could be fewer.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna once the reviews take place, Ed does their review, we do our review. We'll be taking a look at the applications that score high and see where we have applications for both the Ed School Climate Transformation and the Project Aware, where they both have high scores. Those would certainly be funded. There's certainly a possibility that if, let's say, Ed only is able to score 14, we would still be looking at high scores to try to fund an additional 6 to make our 20. But in order to go to review, yes, you do have to apply for both grants.
This is Mimi from Georgia, from the State Department of Ed as well. Question about a timeline. Could you let us know when applicants will receive notification, number one, and number two, after that notification, when would state receive the flow money as well as LEAs for the SAMHSA grant?
Can you ask the second question again? I'm sorry, I missed part of it.
Yes. Number one, when will you all make the decisions and let states know if they were selected? And number two, when states are selected, when would we be notified of the flow of the money? Would it start in October, September?
SAMHSA is anticipating that the awards will be made by September 15th. They have to be made by September 30th. They have to be made before the end of the fiscal year. But right now they're identifying September 15th as the anticipated date. Brian, for Ed, do you have a date?
No, we typically make our, depending on the peer review schedule, we are typically in the second half of September. And when we're in that time frame, we generally use an October 1st project period starting date.
Okay. And as far as the flow of funding, I mean, the flow of funding, once the award is made, the funding would be deposited into the account, and you would be able to access it.
Thank you.
Yep. Just one clarification, though. Remember that the funding is going to the state educational agency. There's no funding that goes directly from SAMHSA, and I'm sure it's in the case for Ed also, that would go also to the LEAs. So the funding, all the funding goes to the SEA. Do we have any more questions? Okay, Camilla, if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and finish up.
This concludes today's conference. You may disconnect at this time, and speakers, please stand by for post-conference.